So good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Usher, and my company, Koppla, has been, for the last kind of 8-9 months, we've been measuring the impacts and quantifying candidate experience that's been having on the brand and perception for organisations. And I guess kind of today's speakers, there's a lot of kind of talk around kind of hard data, and I think what I'm going to bring, I guess, to the table today is kind of turning what's kind of a fluffy teddy bear experience type aspect to candidate experience and the recruitment process, and turning that into really valuable insights. So you can turn that into improvements along the kind of journey and moving that forward. So let's get started. So at the moment, candidate experience is everywhere. So on my Hootsuite, I follow the hashtag candidate experience. I do have a life, but I don't just follow that. And within that, there's lots of stuff that's being shared at the moment out there. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. And you know, for me, I think it's a really long overdue, topic that's really needed to be improved out there in the industry. And I think we kind of reached a point where people are engaged a brand, completed an awkward application, attended several interviews, kind of to be, investing a lot of their time and effort to then be told no, or to have a really bad experience along the way of your organisation and as a brand. And that was kind of okay, and it kind of become the acceptable norm. And even just this week, I was engaging with someone on LinkedIn who was very openly sharing their negative experience on their latest experience of a recruitment process with a brand, not naming and shaming necessarily, but who's seen it on LinkedIn. There's then a plethora of comments that follow beyond that, because people love to share their negative experiences. Welcome to Britain. So for me, I want you just to all just think for a minute. Projection is perception. And this is something which I've kind of stolen from neuro-linguistic programming. Has anyone done any NLP? And this is just something to think about. You're all in the trenches. You're all, working hard, head down, trying to fill vacancies, trying to innovate, trying to please hiring managers, trying to get through the volume of candidates. But just think for a minute, what does your recruitment process project to candidates? And actually, does it accurately reflect your employer brand, your EVP, your internal culture? How does it make people feel? And, what kind of the connections and emotions are you actually creating along that journey? Do people feel really frustrated completing your application? Are they really disillusioned talking to recruiters? Are they massively frustrated because of the lack of communication? What impact is that having? Or do people feel really inspired? Do they feel looked after? Are they, wanting to work for your business? Is your charm offensive building up to something that actually means that the candidates are super engaged with your business, and that when they kind of accept your role, they even might be rejecting other roles at the same time, even potentially on a lesser salary, because they've made a much stronger connection with your business and brand? So, or are we so focused on filling the vacancies that we actually forget to consider what applicants think and how they feel about the process, and if they're happy about the experience? And if not, what's the real impact of that? And I think one of the, during our research last year, we came across a variety of comments, but this particular one, I think, really encapsulates a whole host of impacts when things do go wrong. So this is a senior leader who, Margaret, who applied for a role. And now Margaret was, she'd been in corporate for 20 years, and she did lots of charity work as part of it in her spare time. So she got to a point in her career where she wanted to make a change and bring her skill set into the not-for-profit sector. And charities love these types of candidates because obviously they like to utilise their skill set within their business. But actually, what actually happened in this instance was, in this example, her interview experience was badly affected by the hiring manager, who quite frankly needed a bit of a dose of reality around their behaviour and ultimately their current skill set around how to conduct an interview and how to deliver an experience and the brand, was actually the impact of this was there to see. So not only did it have an impact on the brand and the experience, but as we can see also the bottom line as well. And this is a real life example. So what are some of the challenges and why are we finding this thing kind of so difficult? And I think one of the key challenges for me is the candidate journey is kind of like a plate at a Greek wedding. It's kind of now being completely smashed, and it's got, there's lots of fragments and there's lots of moments and moments between the moments that when they kind of come together, create an experience and bring people through the journey. I know this has kind of been bounced previously, but how many of you have actually picked up a mobile and actually applied for a role at your business? Or, given it to one of your senior leaders and said, apply for a role, and see how effective that application process is and what perceptions that creates. The other one for me is reception to exit walk. I mean, all these fragments all make up the experience. What do people see? I mean, I've been to thousands of meetings over the years. When you go into the reception, how are you greeted? What do you see? What do you hear? Sometimes what do you smell? Those all have the impacts on the experience. So if you haven't already, map out your candidate journey to within an inch of its life, no stone unturned, and really I'm going to show you later, the smallest of details can make the biggest impact. And just to kind of give some context, I guess, the journey, because not everybody can understand what's happened and what's changed, is a fantastic example of how, I guess, the customer and candidate journey has changed. And a good concept of this is called the 0 moment of truth. Has anybody heard of this at all out there? Great. Okay, a couple of you. So this was actually around about 2012. And what this is basically about, and it's a great example of just how it's changed and how we can influence people's decisions and perceptions. So in the kind of old days, what we had is a stimulus, which would be an advert. Let's say Marmite, just split the room. So Marmite advert, you go to the shelf, you see the advert with the packaging, you buy the product, you go home, you consume the product, and that would be your second moment of truth. So you had stimulus, first moment of truth, second moment of truth. Now what's happening from a consumer point of view is we have a stimulus advert, and the first thing you see, say you saw an advert for Nike trainers, the first thing you don't do is run down the shop to buy the trainers. You pick up your mobile, you go online and you research and you look at reviews, you look at content, you look at what people are saying about it, and they all shape your decision making, and that shapes your decisions to whether you're going to purchase or whether you move into that next stage in the process. And then ultimately when you buy the product, you share that experience, which then becomes the next person's 0 moment of truth, and onwards and upwards we go. And this is no different to the candidate journey. So what we have is obviously the advert, and then we have the 0 moment of truth. And that 0 moment of truth is obviously Glassdoor, love it or hate it, your career site, social channels, all of these areas shape perception of your business. But what's, I think, a big differentiator, a challenge that I think we all have, is at the first moment of truth and second moment of truth, people are sharing their experiences throughout all of those touch points, which means we have to deliver that experience the whole way through the journey. Okay? So what this means as an organisation, well, for a start, we've gone away from, I guess, a traditional employer, where the only way you could find out what it's like to work for your business is either you know someone, friend or family, or you actually press your face up against the window and you can see what the inner workings of a business. Whereas now, we are absolutely more transparent than we've ever been before. And our business is absolutely a glass box. So thinking about kind of using this theme of transparency, and it's utilised quite a bit at the moment, is start to kind of build up and create transparency by simply listening and looking at building rapport and trust and connections with people by simply listening. And the mere act of, I think, asking for feedback shows you're wanting to listen and learn, and I think says a lot about business and people. And I think a recent example of this that really shows, I guess, the power of A, listening, and B, what the power of, I guess, a single piece of feedback can have, was with Tesla. And this was a real-life tweet that came out in December, where there was an existing customer, Loic L'Amour, who was pretty hacked off that he wanted to charge his Tesla on one of the superchargers, but unfortunately what people were doing was they were plugging the cars in, and then they were overstaying their charging time, whilst they were obviously doing yoga or having a latte in San Francisco, whatever they do over there. So what eventually happened was that they tweeted and hooked in Elon Musk. And I think what's amazing here is, Elon Musk, whether it was him or his social team, they're listening. And what they did is they responded on the same day and said, you're right. Actually, it is an issue, and we're going to do something about it. And what happened was that We'll Take Action resulted in 6 days later, they changed the complete terms of business so that that customers were then charged for overstaying their welcome. So I just think on so many levels, the learnings here is, on so many levels, this shows that as a business, they're listening and they're prepared to listen to their candidates, their customers, whatever concept, whatever term you want to use, they're listening and they're turning that feedback into action immediately. And I just think, perceptually as a business, I just think that's awesome. So, given this kind of notion, and let's bring it back to candidates, is let's give candidates a seat at the table. And latest research has shown that with, I think it was Talent Board, literally the latest one they released, was 87% of candidates who had a one-star experience were never asked for feedback on the process. So let's flip that around, only 13% were. Second to that, I think it was only 36% who received a 5-star experience were asked for feedback. So I just think for me, we're not asking for enough feedback. I think and how we ask for that feedback along the journey is incredibly important. And that's some of the things that some of the things that I'm here to share today. So, voice of the candidate. So, for me, if there's one thing I want to impart today, is even if you're already running surveys or you're going to start asking for feedback during the journey, is capturing the feedback is an actual touch point on the journey. It's not a bolt-on, and it's not something that is a kind of secondary thought. The actual experience of giving feedback should also be positive and create a positive perception. How many of you receive surveys from brands on a regular basis, and you open it up and it's a survey monkey, and it just doesn't look good, it doesn't render properly on the mobile, and the questions just doesn't work. So really putting some thought to the actual where you're asking and when you're asking. So with this in mind, last year we basically started measuring candidate experience for a FTSE 100 business. And they'd literally just released a brand new EVP, employer brand, and also career website. And they wanted to understand, it was a bit of a shame when we came together, because I would have loved to have done this before they'd actually rolled this out. We kind of got engaged afterwards, but nonetheless, we still created some great insight. But what they wanted to do was really understand what that impact was and look at some of that return on investment to see, was it actually having a positive impact? Now, one of the things that we've used is the root of all of our surveys and all of our insight is Net Promoter Score. It's obviously very prominent in the customer service industry. Anybody aware of NPS or used NPS previously? There's a few hands. So everybody understands what it is. It's propensity to recommend a brand or a service or a business based on the experience. So normally it's that last interaction, what the impact of that, and whether you, based on that experience, would you recommend a friend or family? And you score between 0 and 10. 9 and 10 is deemed promoter. 7, 8 is neutral, and sub 6 is detractors. And then basically what you do is, without getting too, but you minus and plus out and do a calculation, you have a figure that then gives you your Net Promoter Score. Good score is 0 to 50 in the industry as a standard. So what did we capture? So on this particular touch point, when somebody applied for a role within the business, everybody receives a survey based on that particular experience. What we found was, and this was the initial pilot phase, we now do it across the whole company, but this was the initial pilot phase that we did, just to keep it tight and small for now. We found that candidates were massively engaged post-application stage. We were getting on, I think at peak, we were getting about 52% click-through rate, of which we're getting about 70%, 72% at peak response rates, of which 90% were given verbatim comments. So just a ton load of information that we started to capture. Then we looked at, in this instance, we found that 72% said their percentage of brand change positively or very positively. 44% were promoters at that stage. And you'll notice here 40% are neutral. And that's kind of okay, I think, at that stage. The job of the resourcing team and the hiring managers is then to move that needle towards promoters as they go through the process. And then we have overall experience, which I think combined was 76% rated application, 8 or more, of which 27% gave it a 10 out of 10. So let's just say it went down quite well, that the overall experience was going very, very well for them. Second to that, whilst we had candidates, we thought, well, while we've got them, let's learn more about them, rather than just about, let's rate your experience of the application. So what we started to find out about the audience and find more about them, what we found was 30% were current loyal customers of the business, and also 32% purchased in the last 6 months from one of their brands. The other things we kind of started to look at as well is type of content and research channels. And we wanted to look at things such as what type of content do they want to read or understand about a business when looking for a job, and not necessarily specific to the client, but actually to understand a bit more about them. And what we found was, and this kind of then created more questions, was we found that career path was very prominent. We were able to say, well, from a career path point of view, let's look at some of the research channels that you're engaging with, such as Google search on SEO, we're looking at your company career site, or job boards, and looked at some of the content to say, are you sharing career stories or video content or career paths for particular roles or across your kind of attraction channels, of which some of the answer was actually no. So it just stimulated further conversation to say, our candidates want this information, but are you necessarily feeding that information at the right time? And secondly, another area to point out was Glassdoor. 25% of candidates said they would use Glassdoor as part of their zero moment of truth. And what we actually discovered when we looked at their Glassdoor feed was the responses they were putting on was not necessarily appropriate, but it needed guidance and it needed shaping. And this is so important right now in terms of how you engage back on Glassdoor, because once it's on, it's on. And whether it's good or bad, good, positive or negative feedback, how you respond is incredibly important, whether to nullify some of that negativity or to encourage and provide a positive experience. And that feeds into your zero moment of truth. Make no bones about that. And finally, comments. So we did a whole load of text analysis. It was really cool. Personal favourite of mine. And the tone and language was amazing. It changes, particularly as you move through the candidate journey. And I just want to point Tesla out here, and I guess the emphasis of it takes one comment to then open up, I guess, a rabbit warren to a certain degree, is the word allow there. You might not see it out there, but the word allow, we delved into that and said, well, what does that mean? Allow us to do what? And we found there was a community of UX and designers who basically were saying, allow us to attach some of our portfolio work, because obviously these types of people, they're portfolio-based candidates, and hiring managers would find it extremely useful to see some of their portfolios. Now, obviously, they've done a lot of work on the actual application process and making it super easy to engage, but they just hadn't considered some of the kind of the smaller communities in there, and therefore we made recommendations to then look at how we can then shape some of the application process. So this is all about, when you've got an application process performing on that level, there's still marginal gains to be had on a regular basis, but you can take from the feedback really easily. But it's just finding those little words and those little nuggets to continually refine and improve. And the next touch points we measured was post-rejection. So I'm not going to lie, this got pretty brutal at this stage. And one of the things that we particularly wanted to understand was number 2. And this was about the people they interacted with. Out of water now. So as far as, I've grown up with recruitment, and I think no matter for what technology you invest in or for what amazing EVP or employer brand you invest in, I think it's amazing to do that. For me, it's the people that actually make the emotional connections and really actually nail the recruitment side. So the human interaction for me is an incredibly important part, whether it's hiring manager or recruiters. And we wanted to understand the impact that they were having on the candidate experience. So what we discovered, and we kind of put this into kind of a basic viewpoint in this slide, is you'll see on the left side, Net Promoter Scores had a lot of detractors. And red is bad, obviously. And what we were finding was we were in a negative NPS situation. And I don't care what business you're in, you can't afford to have this kind of experience. So what we wanted to find is, okay, what's the root cause to the output on the NPS? So then we kind of broke it down and started to look at some of the root cause analysis. So we can see here in this example, recruiter experience was good, but hiring manager experience wasn't so good, which was then having an impact on time to feedback. It was also having an impact on the quality of feedback. And what some of the situations here is that could be affecting is hiring managers are running all different kinds of sets of standards and interview standards. You've got feedback timeframes that are completely out of control. And that's all having an absolute direct impact on brand perception change and also the overall experience. What this allows you to do in resourcing is to have conversations internally and depersonalize it, and to be able to influence and use this information internally, which is absolutely what we started to do. And I think Virgin Media and Sophology recently shared some amazing case studies around using some of this hiring manager feedback to actually be able to engage the business and create workshops and toolkits to educate hiring managers. Hiring managers generally haven't had interview training, and it's down to us to obviously educate and support them, and particularly around delivering EVP and employer brand is a really big one. And what we actually do, when you start actually moving the dial, is start improving some of the hiring manager experience and the time to feedback and quality. This is what then starts to happen. The dial starts to change away from the red into a plus, and then start moving towards best practice as a business. So next stage for us was the final stage, or one of the fourth touch point, was post-hired. And for us, you'd expect not to have any detractors at this point. But I think for me, it's just really good practice to really monitor how the overall experience is, even when hired. And I've always been brought up on the notion you can hire people successfully badly. So you might place people, when we place people in roles, and you think, great, we've done a good job, but that experience may not be the best situation. And some of the things that we kind of, again, marginal gains, we looked at example themes that we took out from this particular touch point was recruiter training. So we identified in some of the insight that some of the candidates were saying the presentation of offer for a particular recruiter, they were scoring quite low. So when we engaged that recruiter and had a conversation, they actually said, I'm actually pretty petrified of presenting an offer. It's not my bag. It's not something I enjoy. And it was just identified a training intervention to then educate them and actually show them how to effectively present and close an offer. Not something that everyone would naturally assume that naturally people know. And another interesting one that we came across was, I think it averaged out about 6 or 7 out of 10 was the information, the clarity of information on offer. And we just thought that was way too low. So when we started to look at the verbatim comments, it actually showed that the information that was sent to the candidates, physical on the touch point, was actually creating more questions than answers. So we were able to then look at the content and look at how we can streamline that for the business. And finally, it was mentioned Click earlier. Highly recommend them, Swedish business and global business. We basically dashboard all of this stuff, and we just, again, it was this kind of stuff we did for fun and just playing around with the data. But one thing that absolutely happens when you sit with your team and you show them data in this format is everyone comes alive and wants more of it. and particularly Click is really good at slicing and dicing data. So once you set up the right parameters, you can then start to slice and dice, and some of the stuff that we then started to do was then connect that sentiment to the ATS data itself. So then we could actually identify very specifically which departments or which hiring manager or which recruiter were delivering positive or negative scores, and then use that insight to then engage the business and obviously identify areas of improvement. And one thing also that we started doing was recruitment agency experience. I don't know how many of you use agency, what proportion of your, even if you use them for a small or large proportion of your intake, they represent your brand, measure them, and we have been, and it's been a really, really good monitoring process, and again, an ability to manage the agency relationship. You know, we've made some suggestions to actually give them some targets to attain on that side. So in summary, just 5 points, yeah. I think for me is influence your 0 moment of truth. I think by the pure funnel of recruitment, we kind of tend to focus like the Pareto law, 80-20. We tend to focus 80% of our time on 20% of the candidates because they're the ones that kind of track through. Your candidate experience or your candidate experience strategy should kind of flick around the other way. We should be providing experience to 80% as a minimum, a positive one that's engaging and leaves a positive experience. We can't please them all. You're never going to be able to, but I think the strategy and thinking should be more towards the masses rather than just the people who become kind of best friends as they go through the recruitment process and then are placed. More people should have more positive experience. Choose your touch points to measure. I've given an example of 4. There are others, so post-rejection, I think that was mentioned in the last one, and also hiring manager experience we've been doing as well. So there's lots of different kind of channels, lots of different touch points. I think the big one for me as well, which we've used, is candidate feedback's got no hidden agenda or politics behind it. So use it to kind of influence and create your own internal benchmarks. There's loads of great data and loads of great white papers out there at the moment, but I'm all for just create your own and use that in your own way. And I think for me, choose one area to improve. Focus on it, watch the dial move in the right direction. It's incredibly satisfying. So, thanks very much. Change again.